Test, test, test.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. Salawat. Okay, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Taqabbal Allah a'malakum. We will be beginning panel 5 momentarily, so if I could please ask you all to take your seats. We will be beginning panel 5, theism and atheism, momentarily. So please, if I could ask everyone to return to their seats. I don't want to go there, but the sister side is looking much more ready to learn than the brother's side. Yeah. I hear some cries of agreement coming from over there. I didn't say I was surprised. There was no surprise was expressed. I'm just throwing shade on the brothers. Okay, we'll be beginning momentarily. Muhammad. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Okay, so we're coming to panel 5 today. Theism and atheism. So we've already heard, a couple of speakers have already touched on this topic so far in the conference. In particular, Sayyid Muhammad Ridhavi in his opening remarks, in his keynote address, called attention to new atheism and atheistic arguments against the existence of God. And I think, living in the modern world, atheism and the challenge of atheism is an ever-present feature in discussions about God. And especially in relation to discussions about God, religion, and science. For those of you of a similar age to me, you'll remember sort of going through young adulthood with people reading books like God Is Not Great by, not Sam Harris, but Christopher Hitchens, that's right. And do you know what's an excuse? He's British. Like, I'm just trying to evade responsibility for my people here. I mean, let's face it, we're in North America. Like, Christopher Hitchens is not the worst thing that the British have sent over here. Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion was a phenomenon when it came out. It got a lot of media attention, and it really marked a shift in discussions about the existence of God. But I think also the discussion has moved beyond the new atheists. Like there are new forms of atheism, new ways of thinking about disbelief, and there are new struggles that we face as theists living in a godless society, but not godless in the sense that people actively disbelieve in God, but godless in the sense that people sort of look at the idea of God and sort of go, so what? There's sort of an indifference there. So we've got 3 really interesting papers in this panel, and I've been looking forward to these. They're very exciting. So first up, in almost reverse order, we're doing this just because of some of the speakers' schedules. So we're going to start with Dr. David Coolidge, who's going to talk about past history, present struggles, devotional theism in the 21st century. He'll be followed by Sheikh Dr. Saeed Subhani, who will be discussing the teleological argument in the modern world. And then finally, we will end with Professor Nabil Hussain, who is talking about atheists who love religion, anti-theism, and debates about God. And this panel, if that wasn't enough, this panel, because backed by popular demand, this panel will be chaired by Sheikh Vinay Ketia, who will be coming up to the stand momentarily. So if we could welcome him to the podium to chair this panel with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So you've got the biographies in order, yeah, and then just remind them to use the clicker.
Thank you, Alex. So, as he just mentioned, our first speaker is Dr. David Coolidge. Dr. Coolidge received his PhD in 2023 from the Graduate Theological Union with a dissertation about Muslim perceptions of the Hindu tradition. He has worked at Dartmouth College, then at Brown University, so has a lot of experience in the Muslim community in general, as well within academia. As well as having not only a specialization in Islam, but a specialization in Indian religions and Hinduism as well. So it's going to be a very interesting paper. The title of his paper is Past History, Present Struggles, Devotional Theism in the 21st Century. So without further ado, Dr. Coolidge, come on up, please. Thank you. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
السلام عليكم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم وصلى الله على محمد وآله وسلم. If we were to do a global census, we might get numbers such as this: that there are 2,380,000,000 Christians around the world, 1,910,000,000 Muslims, 1,160,000,000 Hindus, and then, on down the list. Now, what is striking about this particular statistic is that all of these largest traditions in the world began in pre-modernity. Right, so if we're talking about the modern world, all three of these traditions began before this thing we call modernity or the modern world came into existence. And if you remember from the very first presentation, the chart of the technological changes over the last 5,000 years, the reality is that we can only really go back to the year 3000 BC and the invention of writing to try to trace these traditions in any more specific historiographic certainty, so that we can hear from other people what they mean when they're doing their religious traditions. The oldest text, arguably, is the Rig Veda. The Sanskrit text is the foundation, one of the foundational texts of the Hindu tradition. And so, we can see what people were actually saying about life and existence and what it means to be human. But before that, we can only speculate. And then if you also remember about the first presentation, there was a chart about changes in religiosity between 1980 and 2020. And he didn't mention it, the Secretary General, thank you for doing that talk, but he didn't mention it, but the top line was those who are sort of outwardly practicing religious people, traditionally religious or something like that. And it was stable at 40% of the global population. So if we were to sort of look at that population, those who are worshiping God on a regular basis and are comfortable, I believe in God and I believe in whatever I believe in, the bulk of them would come from three particular communities: Christians, Muslims, and Hindus. And so if we look at the history of religions as a phenomenon over the last 5,000 years in history, we can trace, to a certain extent, the development of particular religious traditions, some of which are gone. Ancient Egyptian religion was around for thousands of years, and all that the Quran really mentions of it is the story of Musa and Harun alayhim as-salam, may peace be upon both of them, confronting Fir'aun, and in effect confronting the entire basis of the ancient Egyptian religious system. And now it's gone, وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلِ, as the Quran says, the falsehood has perished. Maybe when you were alive in the time of Musa and Harun alayhim as-salam, peace be upon both of them, you would have think, oh my gosh, it's so dominant, it's so powerful. But then, like Ashab al-Kahf, the people of the cave, if you could go to sleep for 3,000 years and wake up in our world, and you'd say, oh, where's Ra? Where's the son of Ra on the face of the earth? And people would laugh at you. They say, oh, well, you can watch this movie called The Mummy with Brendan Fraser, and that's what we think about it now. So now, of course, if we're talking about atheism, atheists and those who especially are militantly atheists lump all of these things together. And they say, well, what is the difference between the worship of Ra and the worship of Krishna or Jesus or Allah in terms of being, sort of three ways of talking about the supreme deity and the three dominant living traditions that have survived from pre-modernity? Well, in the social world, in the historical world, the power is that we're here. We are just as much a part of the modern world, and we are worshipers of Allah. And down the street, there are worshipers of the Trinity. And then down the street from them is maybe, I assume in Toronto you have a BAPS Swaminarayan temple. They're worshiping God in their own way. And you can read there's a whole book in comparative theology about BAPS Swaminarayan theology published by Cambridge University Press if you're interested in that sort of thing. So point is that we haven't died, right? As the talk about secularization in Iraq in the mid and latter part of the 20th century indicated, that was a time when people thought that religion was going to die in human society. And that was the concern of the novelist that she was talking about. But it has survived. But our modern world has a particular genealogy. And that particular genealogy, as we all know, is, European colonialism, European colonial modernity, whatever you want to call it, that created this world. I see the vestiges of the British Empire all day, every day. I don't know how you look at, the tajalliyat of Allah in this particular moment, when I sort of connect the tajalliyat of the moment, of the waqt, to the historiographical processes that bring about these moments, I also see the vestiges, the athar of the British. And I think, as Canadians and Americans, we should obviously all own up to that. But we also forget that this European colonial process that happened over the last 500 years and created the modern world system, as Emanuel Wallerstein would call it, was deeply connected to the Christian tradition, both Protestantism and Roman Catholicism, not so much the Orthodox traditions, Greek Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox, Syrian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, right? When you look at the colonial enterprise, it's much more heavily Protestant and Catholic. And so when we are talking about religion in the modern world, especially in countries like the UK or Canada or the United States or Australia, and we see this all the time, we're often presupposing the centrality of Christianity in world history, the centrality of Christianity in society, the centrality of Christianity of laying the terms for theological engagement, right? And we see that even in the academy, where a Muslim who wants to identify with their tradition, get a PhD, and speak their truth to power, so to speak, is in the same case as the Hindu who wants to do that with the Bhagavad Gita or the Bhagavata Purana or whatever their sacred text may be. And this quote, more than any other, shows that. 1835, Thomas Babington Macaulay, a British colonial official, says, "A single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia." And I was saying this in a conversation with Vineet Chander, who's the Hindu chaplain at Princeton University, my alma mater, and he was saying, growing up in the Hindu community in the United States, I heard that quote over and over again, but not till you just said it right now, and he has a PhD now, mashallah, not till you said it right now did I notice that they linked India and Arabia. In the modern world system, and again, you could look at the scholarship of Emanuel Wallerstein if you want to see this, area studies was how the European colonial gaze looked at the sort of subaltern peoples of the world. Oh, here in South Asia and the British Raj, they're studying Sanskrit, or they're also studying Persian, right? Because it was a Persianate milieu for the Muslims. And then here in Arabia, they have these Arabic texts. So you have, your Ignaz Goldseers on one side, and you have your Max Muellers on the other side. So for those who are in the academy, know who I'm talking about. These European scholars who are foundational in Hindu studies and in Islamic studies. So I like the term devotional theism as a way to describe something that links the three largest pre-modern traditions in the modern world. So obviously Christianity and Islam, we understand many of the linkages, but within the Hindu tradition they have a tradition that is dominant called bhakti. And bhakti means devotion. And that means devotion to, usually one supreme Lord. Now there are various ontologies and metaphysics that undergird the different Hindu communities, but the point is that, let's just say Toronto area, we come to our masjid, we raise our hands, we say, Ya Allah. Someone else goes to the Roman Catholic Church and they stand in front of the crucifix and they call out, perhaps, "O Father, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." And then just down the street from them, someone goes, "Hey Krishna, please, I have to pass my test. Bless me. I need to get married." Whatever the case may be, right? And so that what Vinay was talking about the secular age and Charles Taylor, that is one of the manifestations of it, is that we each have our place, right? In Vancouver, they're all in the same street, right? One after the other. In SEBA, the Shia Association of the Bay Area, in San Jose, California, there's us, then there are the Taiwanese Christians, then there's the Korean Christians, then there's the followers of the Pushti Marg, the followers of Vallabhacharya. There's a particular Krishna Bhakti movement in India over there. And over there, there's, I think it's called Resurrection Church, a mega church, evangelical Protestant. I don't know if the mayor of San Jose decided that, like as fiat, but as Vinay was talking about, you have that pluralism within this dominant political order. Okay, you can do that over there, you can do that over there, and you can do that over there. So, we have these linkages that we could talk about, We have sacred texts, Bible, Quran, Bhagavad Gita being a nice way of thinking about it. And then we also have our questions of authority. So this has come up in some of the panels, right? The same issues are being debated in those communities as well. And that relationship between the academic world and the religious communities is also part of it. You have your reformist thinkers who then become professors at big universities, and then they have the whole story about Professor Madarisi, who was one of my teachers, and the translation into Persian, plays out in similar ways, people writing on Sanskrit texts or whatever they may be. So there's ways in which we share these languages in this modern world that we share together. So I want to highlight 4 in particular: the academic, the political, the social, and the perspectival. In terms of the academic, what I would say is it's fundamentally about scientific descriptions of reality. And it is rooted in an evolutionary worldview. If we go back to that typology and the map, if you will, of religious traditions evolving over the last 5,000 years, there's literally the idea that it's all an evolutionary tree. That if you go back far enough into the Epic of Gilgamesh in the ancient Near East, you will find a proto-Nuh story, for example, a story that is similar to the story of the prophet Noah. And so the secular mind will say, well, Noah doesn't exist. It's a trope that comes from the ancient Near East that then was sort of naturalized into Hebrew literature, after the time of Dawood and Sulaiman alayhim as-salam, and then it sort of from there entered into Islam later on, right? And then they have their same critiques of Ramayana, right? When they look at Ramayana, they say, well, this clearly is a mythological story that doesn't exist. In the secular mind, Nuh alayhi salam, Prophet Noah, peace be upon him, is the same as Rama in the Hindu tradition, a mythological figure from prehistory that there's not much empirical evidence for, right? And this becomes the basis of historical truth. So we know that the Roman Empire was there because we have the texts in Latin and we can see the aqueducts in France or whatever the case may be. But if you go back further, it's really hard to say. And so it's a matter of faith, right? That becomes one of the ways in which faith is expressed in this modern secular world. Okay, you believe Rama exists, fine. Just keep it to your temple. Okay, you believe Noah exists, but keep it to your synagogue or your church or your mosque. And then when you go into academia, which is heavily inflected with a particular sense of global history, and I teach the book called A Brief History of the Human Race by Michael Cook, who was another one of my professors at Princeton. I try to teach Muslims at Bayan Islamic Graduate School how to read that book and think through it from a modern Muslim perspective. Because at the end of the day, if they are to go do a PhD in the humanities and social sciences, they will have to deal with that larger historical worldview. And then in the political, obviously we understand that we live in Canada, for example, or the United States of America, and these sort of secular democratic polities that come out of the Christian tradition, again, Protestant and Catholic primarily. And so we, for example, see that there's a particular genealogy of the political idea that you're free to change your religion whenever you want, right? So Vinay and I are beneficiaries of that law, right? And then they say, well, my parents will sometimes say, well, now what if your kids don't want to be Muslim? That's not okay. May Allah protect their iman and may they all become awliya, So that's not my goal. But at the same time, I'm grateful for the fact that I was able to leave Christianity and then leave secular humanism to become a Muslim. And then we can think of other things, right? Taxation, for example. Taxation in Islam is a central fiqh issue. Zakat, khums, kharaj, sadaqah, all these things, they're related to the concept of modern taxation. But obviously in Canada and the United States of America, taxation is a secular issue. If you want to pay these charities, great. And in the United States of America, we have a rule that you can give up to 50% of your adjusted gross income to religious organizations, which is one of the most anti-Marxist policies in human history, right? To say that you're going to take money away from the people and give it to the church, But we have to have that to have our masjids and our Islamic schools and so on and so forth. I don't know the system in Canada, but it's probably roughly similar. Then we have the social. We have, and what I'm defining as the ubiquity of easily attaining desires. Proliferation of online pornography. It's totally legal. Easy access to alcohol and drugs. You can go to the weed store, you can go to the alcohol store. It's part of the society. It's there for your taking, and the only thing that's going to keep you is some form of taqwa, right? It's not actually illegal. And we have more movies and music now than it's even possible to consume. When I was younger and I wanted to listen to a sort of obscure punk rock band, I had to drive an hour to some random store that maybe had that record and maybe didn't, or I called them ahead of time. Now you have with Spotify, and you can just like, boom, any single song in the history of humanity or something like that. But then we also have something which I call the perspectival, which is an increased awareness of cultural diversity. And this is the main point I want to leave with you with, is that in this space, the secular age of Charles Taylor, it is the secular that becomes the universal gaze, right? So if you want to go study Arabic and Islam at University of Toronto or McGill, you can do it with Jews and Christians and Muslims and atheists. Right? If you want to study Hinduism at those institutions and study Sanskrit, you can do it with Jews and Christians and Hindus and now me, one Muslim. You know, because that's part of that universal categorizing. We are on the top, looking down at human history, looking down at all these peoples of the world who we've now gathered under our post-colonial world order. And so the people of Gujarat and the people of Punjab and the people of Yemen and the people of Lebanon have come, and as long as they play by our rules, they can, you know, add to the melting pot, right? They can bring their tastes and their flavors. And we've all experienced this. If you think you're the equal, if you think that your way of thinking is the equal of theirs, then there will be some tension. There will be, wait a second, no. And I experience this a lot, because they look at me and they think, oh, you're one of us. And then I say, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana li hadha wa ma kunna lanahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah. And they're like, what is going on? I'm like, he's not one of us. He went native. He drank the Kool-Aid, you know? And I've had to deal with that my whole life, since I became Muslim. And so, how do we deal with this? Very briefly, just in my field, I'll give you one example. That we have figures in our tradition that represent the universal impetus of Islam in human history and culture and society. And one of those great figures is Al-Biruni rahmatullahi alayh. He's a scholar who went to India in the 11th century, and he learned Sanskrit, and he wrote a book that Michael Cook, again, a non-Muslim global historian, said he was the first ethnographer. He was the first person who provided a sort of proto-scientific description of another culture based on like their texts and their, explaining of their texts and the way, and it literally is just, this is what those people do. This is their family structures. These are their calendrical systems. These are their religious texts. We know that certain Sanskrit texts, were in existence from that time or before because they're mentioned by Al-Biruni in Arabic, not in any other Sanskrit text, right? He was that good of an ethnographer. And so what does this show us? And I have a short article you can find online, Past, Present, and Future of Muslim Scholarship on the Hindu Tradition, on a website called the Berkeley Institute for Islamic Studies, which is run by one of the people involved in it is Dr. Taimaz Tabrizi, who did his PhD up here at McMaster University. Another person, Bilal Muhammad, who's over in Mississauga. And so I wrote that for the community, right, who are not going to read my academic articles. But I try to boil down this lineage of Muslims who study the Hindu tradition. And so when we think about figures like that, and there are many others we could call to mind, we recognize that we have always lived in a world of diversity where we are globally a minority, right? We sometimes like to think in this kind of intra-Muslim way where we're like, oh, we were once dominant. But no, globally we were not. We were not in North and South America, right? We weren't all in the way to South Africa, like in terms of a dominant presence. And so when we think about our present now, we recognize that we're in the same position we've always been globally. That these 2 billion or so Christians, they're not going away anywhere soon. 1 billion Hindus are not going away anywhere soon. But there's a way in which we are united in facing the challenges of maintaining our religious traditions in a secular world, right? And sometimes politics makes us enemies, but in many respects, sometimes we are allies in that struggle to really truly believe in God in the face of secularism. And so we have to have the sort of himma, the sort of audacity, if you will, to believe that we truly do have a universal perspective, right? Our brother, who's the president of the World Federation, he said that, we're an endangered species. But from my perspective, from the minute I learned about the way of Ahlul Bayt, from the first majlis I went to, the Khojas were with me all the way. My first ziyarah to Iraq was with all Khojas, and it was amazing and wonderful, right? Why? Because you're carrying a universal message. At the same time that you're Khojas, you're also bearers of the universal truth, right? So someone like me can benefit from that in a way that is irreplaceable and absolutely priceless. And so I'm out of time, and I want to thank you very much, but it's one last point, is that core to this idea is to distinguish between al-hukm, the hukm taqweeni, the creational command, and the hukm shar'i, right? We still believe what we believe. We still face Mecca. We don't face Rome. We don't face Varanasi, right? We still face Mecca. But we believe that our Lord is the Lord of this entire planet Earth and everything that has ever happened upon it. And وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ, right? He's with you wherever you are. And so I always tell people, the globe is mine. I'm not afraid of anything because my Lord is the Lord who made this planet and made me and made all of us. And so... Ya Ali! Jazakumullah khair, wassalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much, Dr. Coolidge, for that really, really inspirational talk. And also, wow, the number of Nare Haidaris we've had in this conference. I think this is definitely a record for academic conferences, but that was something. So thank you, Professor Owen. Just shout out there for that. I think that might be one of the best Nares I've ever heard as well. I've just outed him, yeah, just mashallah. Now, you said something about this universal message being irreplaceable and absolutely priceless, and I think that's how we all feel about you, Dr. Coolidge. And I know that you've got a flight to catch, so you won't be here for the closing ceremony, so we wanted to express our appreciation to you for coming to this conference, sharing your knowledge, and for all the hard work you do in the service of this universal truth. And so if I could ask the President of the World Federation, Al-Hajj Safta Jafar, to come up here, we'd like to present you with a small token of our appreciation. It's a little award. It may incur an excess luggage allowance, though, as it's a little bit heavy. And we now return to our regularly scheduled programming. Can we please welcome Sheikh Vinay to restore some order in this hall with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Now we are honored to have Sheikh Dr. Saeed Subhani. Dr. Subhani specializes in Islamic disciplines, including theology, philosophy, jurisprudence, and the principles of jurisprudence, Quranic exegesis, history, and many, many other things, mashallah. He has just so much knowledge. He's a fountain of knowledge. He's authored many books. He's a student of Ayatollah Jawadi Amali, Ayatollah Mirza Jawad Tabrizi, and Ayatollah Ja'far Subhani. He's obtained his PhD in philosophy of religion from the University of Edinburgh, and his publications include Religious Diversity and Contemporary Shi'i Thought, among numerous other publications and books that he has written. The title of his talk is The Teleological Argument in the Modern World. So I'm sure it will be very scholarly and very interesting. Dr. Subhani, please come on up. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد. It's a great honor for me to be in this conference. So the topic is teleological argument in the modern world, or the argument of design. The learning outcome of this talk will be, do we have enough evidence for proving the existence of God? Are these arguments convincing for the rational people? Why do some philosophers of the New Age deny the existence of God? And why do we witness religious skepticism? Many people, or some people, they have a doubt. Now, so let's start that how can we know God? How can we appreciate God? How can we understand God? There is a great hadith, it's not a great hadith, there is a great statement which they say, الطرق إلى الله بعدد نفوس الخلائق. There are many ways to know God as the number of creation. Of course, it seems that it's not hadith. For the first time, this statement is mentioned by Sheikh Haydar Amuli, one of the great Shia mysticism urafa. Later, Faiz Kashani, one of, again, great Shia scholars from the 11th century, Islamic 11th century, he denies that it's not hadith. And moreover, amongst the ulama of Ahl Sunnah, Ibn Taymiyyah, Haythami, and they have a doubt whether it is hadith or not. It's a very wise statement. There are many ways to recognize, to know God. One day, Prophet of Islam saw an old lady was using his man-made sewing machine. The Prophet said, "Do you believe in God?" She said, "Yes, Ya Rasulallah." The Prophet said, "Okay, prove the existence of God." So she left the man-made sewing machine, and after a while, the machine stopped working. Then she said, "Ya Rasulallah, this man-made machine needs me. How can we believe that the whole world is running without any conductor, without running any creator?" And the Prophet said, "Alaykum bidin al-ajais." Learn the theology from these ladies. So, as I said, there are many ways for understanding, for knowing, or for proving the existence of God. However, we can classify these ways into three classifications. The first one is, as you know, each argument should consist of three parts. Each argument should consist of three parts. Minor premise, sughra, major premise, kubra, and conclusion. Sometimes both major and minor premise is intellectual. Like the argument from contingency, burhan, wujub, and imkan. I don't want to go in detail. So we know that there are many phenomena in this world. So we ask this phenomenon, of course, is effect. And each effect needs a cause. Then we move the question for discuss. For example, A is created by B. B is the cause for A. Then again, we ask the question, who created B? Again, B needs another cause. So if we keep going this chain, it leads us to infinite regress, tasalsul. Then they prove that this chain of cause and effect should stop. Otherwise, it leads to infinite regress or circular. So both argument, both statement is intellectual. And the second one is, the first one is experimental observation, and the second statement is intellectual, which we are going to discuss today, burhan nazm, the argument of design, or teleological argument. And the third way, brothers and sisters, via kashf و shuhud, heart. We can understand, we can know him. We can prove his existence by purification of our heart. We heard this hadith is mentioned by the Shia and Sunni scholars. Man asbaha lillahi arba'ina sabahan. Jarallah yanabi al-hikmah min mara'i qalbihi ala lisan. Whoever purify his heart for 40 days, Allah will send, Allah will follow the wisdom from his heart to his tongue. And of course, in kashf shuhud, we have many ways. By purification of heart, Allah can remove the veil from our eyes. May Allah elevate the soul our teachers. Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh Amali, 35 years ago, he had a lecture in the Association of Philosophy and Juman Falsafa and Hikmat in Tehran. So he mentioned this statement from his teacher, Ayatollah Tabatabai, and he said, whenever I purify my heart, I control my eye, I control my mind, I can see the better, and the veil removes from my eyes. The more I purify myself, the more I can see better. So one day, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salatu was salam, he denied the existence of God. The Imam said, have you ever been to boat? He said, yes. Have you ever seen any problem or chaos? He said, yes. And Imam said, at that time, have you thought someone to help you? He said, yes. The Imam said, that's God. The person which you are looking for you to help you, that's God. So there are three ways. Number one is total intellectual. Number three is total non-intellectual, like kashf shuhud. And the third one, which we are going to discuss, is the first premise is experimental observation, tajrubeh, and the second premise is intellectual. So I look at a beginning of this argument, the argument of design. It seems that we can find some background for this argument amongst the Muslim and non-Muslim scholars. I don't have time to refer to Muslim scholars. So in India, this argument is presented by the school of Nyaya. So they prove the existence of God by the order of the world. And in the West, it seems that for the first time, Heraclitus and Plato and Aristotle and Stoics, Rawaqiyun, they mentioned this argument. And recently, this argument rebirthed by very famous Christian scholar, William Peale. So I refer to some of these arguments. For instance, amongst the Western scholars, Socrates, he says, regarding this argument, he says we can see only by the light of Allah. By the light of God we can see. And he says that look at the grace of God. You can see his grace everywhere. Then he gave a good example, Socrates. He said, look at the sun. It's not very close to you, otherwise it burns you. It's not very far, otherwise you are going to be frozen. It's amazing. We have the same ayah in the Quran. Man lam yaj'al Allah nuran fama lahu min nur. Since Socrates, he gave an example for sun, it shows that he tried to prove the existence of God by the argument of design. The second scholar is Augustine, Saint Augustine, and one of his book, which is one of the source of natural theology, he says, look at the beauty of the nature. The beauty of nature can guide us. He says the beauty of nature is a strong tool, is an infallible tool to lead us towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, He has a good statement. He says, how can I reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He says, whenever I look at the earth, I see the earth is his creator. And whenever I look at the sky, I realize that sky is his creator. Whenever I look at the beauty of the star in the nighttime, I realize that how beautiful they are, and I'm looking for their creator. In another statement, he says that one day I asked the sky, are you my Lord? He said, no, I'm not your Lord. And I asked the ocean and sea, are they my Lord? All they say, no, we are not your Lord. Your Lord is someone else. Another scholar from the West, John Scott, in the 9th century, which he was famous as the second Augustine, in the book of Deviation of the Nature, he has two beautiful, wise statements. He says that in the wisdom of God, he says God can be seen the existence of world. And the wisdom of God is manifested in the arrangement of the world, the management order. John Ray, another scholar, the founder of the modern botany, he in the book of the wisdom of God manifested in the works of creation, he says, I admire the perfection of the design in the world of plants and the animals. Then he said, through the nature, we can prove the nature's God. So just briefly, I mentioned the history of the argument of design. Now, with your permission, I skip a couple of pages and I go to the argument of design. Brothers and sisters, each argument at least should consist of 2-3 parts. The first part is named Sughra, minor premise. The second one is major premise. And the third one is named conclusion. For example, just for brothers and sisters who might not familiar with the science of logic, we say, Ali studied philosophy. Whoever studied philosophy is clever. Conclusion, Ali is clever. So the argument of design consists of 2 parts. Number one, the first premise that there are many orderly phenomena and purposefulness in this world. This is our first premise. And the second premise is that such order cannot be the outcome of the blind chance, but it stems from an intelligent architect. And conclusion, the world has emerged as a result of design and planning of a wise creator. So let's discuss about these arguments. Let's look at the first premise. The first premise, as I said, has 2 interpretations. Number one, there is accurate, precise, very perfect order in this world. This is number one. Second interpretation or second justification is that there is a precise purposefulness in this world, which I'm going to discuss the argument of design from 2 perspectives. Number one, I don't want to discuss more. The first one is Abraham Creasy. You know, he was the president of the New York Academy. He says the word of existence cannot be the result of accident. It needs a very wise and intelligent creator. Then he says, this is my time, 6 minutes left. Okay, the time is flying. Okay, he says the size of the earth and the distance from the sun, the temperature and the life-giving ray of the sun, the thickness of the earth's skin, the quantity of the water and the amount of the carbon dioxide, the volume of nitrogen, the emergence of man and his survival all indicates the existence of an accurate order in the universe. So he tried to prove the existence of God by the order, by accurate arrangements. So I don't have time. Let's go to second interpretation, is the purposefulness. When you look at the world, you see that everything goes to its own direction. Look at a bee. The bee knows how to produce honey. A bird knows how to lay egg. And all animals, if you look at whatever Allah created, they know how to go to their own destination. So the perfect aim of honey is the perfect aim for bee is honey production. For fruit is fruit production. For animal is general production. So how can we say these creatures, they go to their own destination by themselves? Now, since my time is very short, I mention one example from Morrison. He has a very, very good book, and I advise brothers and sisters to read this book. He mentioned about the purposefulness of the purposefulness in this world. He said, look at this fish, the name of eel. So whenever this fish reaches to the age of maturity, he travels miles and miles, and he goes to the depth of the world, the depths of ocean in the Bermuda Island, and he lay egg. And after that, when the baby came out, the mother passed away, and the children goes back to their own homeland. The same children, when they get mature, when they want to lay egg, they again move to the island, the Bermuda Island, and they lay egg. So then he says, who taught them to travel miles and miles and reach there? So I would like to mention one beautiful thing. So, as I said, brothers and sisters, the argument of design consists of two parts. Number one, you see a very, very accurate, precise order and purposefulness in this world. And let's look at the second premise and Kubra. Again and again, William Pilley, he has a very, very good book, which is The Principle of Moral and Political Philosophy, is a textbook in the University of Cambridge. He has a very famous book, The Natural Theology. He said, if you are walking in a desert and you see a stone, you are going to ask how the stone came to here. So this question is so simple, how the stone came to here. But whenever you see a watch, a very accurate watch is working, and you see in the desert, he said this question is not as simple as the previous question. You are going to ask, who brought it here? Can you say the clock came here by itself? Can we say the clock is created by itself, or someone, an accurate architect, a wise person brought him here? Now, I look at this argument from the philosophical perspective. There is a very important principle in philosophy of Mullah Sadra. It should be a type similarity, senkhiyya, between cause and effect. It means that each cause can produce a specific effect. For example, the ice can produce coldness. The fire can produce the heat. The fire cannot produce coldness. Or the ice cannot make our room hot. So there is a type similarity, senkhiyya, between cause and effect. Then the philosophers, they say, whenever you look at between cause and effect, if the effect is precise, if the effect has a very, very accurate order, the type similarity, senkhiyya, says the architect of this phenomenon should be wise, should be intelligent, because there is a senkhiyya between cause and effect. Now, I have just, if with your permission, a couple of questions has been raised against this argument. How many minutes do I have time? But have you adjusted correctly at the beginning? Pardon? Okay, inshallah in 3 minutes. So the first question which is presented, there are 4 questions against this argument. And alhamdulillah, the Muslim philosopher, even some non-Muslim philosopher, they try to argue and answer. The first question is mentioned by John Haspers. John Haspers says, you discuss about the order. What is the definition of order? What does order mean? Something might be order for someone, and something is not in the order. For example, he says one picture might be beautiful for some people and is a chaos for other people. The answer is that we say to John Haspers, the order is not like a picture. The order of the world is not like a picture. You say someone says it's in order and other group says it's not order. Look at the sun. This ayah is mentioned. The day and night, because the earth is turning around itself and it creates day and night. Again, the earth is rotate around its axis and it creates 4 seasons. So everyone, they say, is a great order. Nobody can deny the order of this world. لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون. So I don't want to go in detail, and just I would like to wrap up my lecture by a great hadith from Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam. Inshallah, you will see the question, the argument in my paper. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, when he reached to Arafah, and he read the ayah Arafah, he presented the ayah Arafah. In his dua, he refers to the argument of design, and he says, كيف يستدل عليك بما هو في وجوده مفتقر إليك. How can I prove that your existence by sun, which sun needs you? How can I prove your existence by moon, because moon needs you? أيكون لغيرك من الظهور ما ليس لك. أيكون لغيرك من الظهور ما ليس لك. Is there any manifestation in the world other than you that it's not for you and it wants to reveal you? Who wants to reveal you? Everyone needs you. حتى يكون هو المظهر لك. متى غبت حتى تحتاج إلى الدليل. Oh my Lord, you are not absent. So since you are present, you don't need dalil. You don't need evidence. Your existence is clear, is self-evident. There is no need for proving your existence. متى غبت حتى تحتاج إلى الدليل. Then Imam said, أميت عين لا تراك. So there are 2 interpretation or 2 translation for this part. Number 1, some of the people who translate this hadith or this dua, umiyat is a cursing, is a nefrin. Nefrin is opposite of dua. So Imam cursing, whoever cannot see God, may Allah blind him. But our teacher, Ayatollah Jawadi Amoli, he used to say, it's not cursing, it's not nefrin. It's jumla khabari, is a statement. Imam wants to say, whoever cannot see you, he is blind. The person who cannot see your existence, he is blind. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
Thank you, Dr. Subhani, for your wonderful and very scholarly talk. MashaAllah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you more tawfiq to share your knowledge and to teach and to shed light upon the madhab of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Now I would like to call up my dear friend, old friend. We go way, way back. Professor Nabil Hussein, before the name professor and all of that, we've known each other much before that. But mashallah, my dear friend Nabil is Associate Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Miami. His research broadly considers the development of Islamic theology, historiography, and debates on the caliphate. I did one of our first podcasts with the Shia Research Institute was with him, so if you want to know more about his book, Opposition to the Imam, amazing book, really, really good book about the history of the Nawasib. Dr. Hussein has a PhD in Near Eastern Studies from Princeton and an MA in Arabic and Islamic Studies from Harvard. He is a recipient of a Fulbright Award and the University of Miami Fellowship in the Arts and Humanities. The title of his talk today is Atheists Who Love Religion, Anti-theism, and Debates About God. Dr. Hussein, come on up, please. Thank you. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Greetings to everyone here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like to thank the organizers for this opportunity to share a little bit of my research and some of my teaching at the University of Miami. Sheikh Fanay was very kind with the introduction. Right after he got off the stage, I wrote him a text message telling him, "You killed it. That was amazing. That was great." His critique of liberalism is something that really is important to me because that is something that I need in my own development. I am one of those individuals who was raised in this liberal tradition and hasn't fully deconstructed what that means to my own psyche. So I was just like, I need to read Sherman Jackson. I need to read what you're reading. I need to see that critique that is launched against liberals who have been described as, I guess the definition of a liberal is someone who's so open-minded that their brain has fallen out. And I immediately thought of myself in that with my second book, he mentioned Opposing the Imam. The second one, Dr. Alex didn't mention it, so I'm mentioning it myself, Caliphate and Imamate, available at all bookstores, fine bookstores everywhere. And it's one in which we asked, my co-author and I, Hassan Ansari, ask what makes a legitimate caliph? What makes a rightful imam? And we provide an anthology for the first time in the English language that tells you these answers according to the Ash'aris, according to the Mu'tazilis, according to the Ibadis, according to the Zaydis, according to 12 Shi'is. We look at Sheikh al-Tusi and his Talkhis al-Shafi, and according to Ismailis. So I have a few copies that I can share, that I can sign and provide for those who are interested. But today's talk is not about that. It's entitled Atheists Who Love Religion, Anti-theism, and Debates About God. I teach a course on atheism that considers two related themes: the reason for which atheism rejects belief in God, in the supernatural, and how we can understand skepticism about the concept of God to be a long tradition that can be traced back many centuries. Atheism is thus both a rejection of religious belief and a religion-like tradition of its own. Because believers formed societies that were hostile or intolerant towards non-believers, atheists usually express their views through the types of questions that they ask, rather than openly declare their heretical beliefs. Rather than openly say, it seems kind of weird to believe in an all-powerful God with the ability to stop all evil, a skeptic or a non-believer would ask, if God exists, why does unspeakable pain, suffering, and evil exist at the same time? Believers can ask the very same questions. The difference is that believers may ask with great confidence that God exists and that there's a compelling answer out there. Some will claim that this answer is simple. Some will say that it's mysterious. Others will say that it's complex. But believers will agree that the real answer is one that God knows and that we can grasp only occasionally as humans. By contrast, non-believers ask these questions as part of a process that has led them to the conclusion that this concept of God has too many problems and there are too many gaps. The ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, who died in 270 BC, was one example of someone who famously voiced his skepticism about the concept of God because he deduced that the existence of such a being would theoretically lead to a non-existence of evil, or that otherwise the concept of God would be very limited and contradictory to popular stories of a creator that keeps a watchful eye and engages in divine intervention. Epicurus famously asks about divine intervention this way: is God both able and willing? Then whence come evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? The early 19th century English poet Percy Shelley similarly asks, if God is infinitely good, what reason should we have to fear him? If he is infinitely wise, why should we have doubts concerning our future? If he knows all, why warn him of our needs and fatigue him with our prayers? If he is everywhere, why erect temples to him? And of course, we know the teaching of the Prophet that Allah has made the earth my masjid, right? So it's not just the temples, the synagogues, the masajid, but the entire earth. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Another reason for which skeptics doubt the existence of God, like the presence of evil, is the presence of a diversity in religions. If the God of one of those religions actually existed, wouldn't that God prevent the continuation of false religions or false sects within a particular religion so that people who decide to worship God will worship the right one? Why allow the universe to continue for thousands of years without resolving this diversity, at least for those who care to seek God? Why not make one true religion unique both in its strength of its claims and the evidence it provides, so that it is compelling for a critical thinking adult and it can be differentiated from false religions? Since seekers would then recognize the strength of its evidence and arguments, they'd gravitate toward that religion, regardless of the country or the continent that they live in. This is, in fact, the claim that Muslims make about Islam. This is, in fact, the claim that Christians make about Christianity. But when we look at the evidence, they all seem to resemble one another in arguing that they have a particular book that represents the Word of God and a number of miracles associated with holy men and women that occurred in their community, proving this claim to be true. And so we're right back to square one. We have multiple religions making parallel claims and who appear to appeal to the same type of evidence, right? This appeal to supernatural events, the strong inner conviction of prophets and early believers in their community who are touched by God, and then the testimony of informants about the past or about that supernatural world. And so the short of it is that there are two timeless questions that have confounded believers and non-believers alike. How can evil exist when there's this omnipotent being who doesn't desire evil? And if God exists, why is there such diversity in religion? And why do most people follow the religion of their culture? In discussing this question in my courses at the University of Miami, we first start off with key vocabulary. And I think this question of definitions and vocabulary was very important. That's something that we saw yesterday when we were considering other questions. For example, or on Friday when we were talking about Shafa and intercession and what that means at another venue, at Emmanuel College. But let's turn to some key vocabulary here. What are anti-theists? Anti-theists are those atheists or non-believers who actively oppose religion and work toward a world without religion, without the phenomenon of religion. Agnostics are people who emphasize the uncertainty in questions about God's existence and often claim that it's unknowable. I'd say there's a common myth about agnostics, and that is that they are people who sit right in the middle and claim that the probability of God's existence and non-existence is 50-50. I would say that that is not agnosticism, and that is not an agnostic. Let's rid ourselves of that misconception. The key feature of agnostics is their epistemology. The idea that all of the evidence for God doesn't yield certainty. That is an agnostic, someone who says that there is uncertainty in all of this regarding the existence of God or the non-existence of God. You can be an agnostic who's uncertain and believe that there is a good chance that God exists, right? You would say that the probability is more than 50%. But because you say that you are unsure and that you might believe that humans don't have the tools to be 100% sure about this, then you would be an agnostic who is 99% sure that God doesn't exist, or that God exists. And so with that element of uncertainty, you're an agnostic who is a believer, who has faith. And faith meaning you trust, you believe, you are taking a leap of faith in the existence of God. There are also agnostics who say that we can't know this answer, and they are 99% sure that God does not exist. And so for that person, they would be an agnostic with atheist leanings. And as it was discussed by Sayyid Rizvi, Richard Dawkins himself puts himself in that category. He can't say that he is 100% sure God doesn't exist. And in fact, he recognizes that it is impossible for an atheist to claim such a thing. He would say that they are being dogmatic in a way that is irrational, and in the way that they critique someone on the other side of the spectrum who is 100% sure in God's existence and says that it can be proven to anyone. They would say both ends of the spectrum are problematic. And of course, for the believer, one can say you can have 100% certainty within your own heart, but that is something that you cannot fully put into words and convince someone else of when you have that 100% certainty because you have witnessed things or because you have experienced things, right? And that's okay, that's different. There's also the term freethinker. And I would say this is an ambiguous term, right? It generally refers to people who form their opinions about the universe without believing in complete obedience to any religious authority. Sheikh Vinay pointed to the fact that in a post-Enlightenment period, there has been a widespread shift in cultures in a postmodernist society where people have become quite skeptical of the authority of ulama or the authority of religious figures. And a freethinker in the pre-modern period was very similar. They were very skeptical of the claims of prophets. They were very skeptical of the claims of religious authorities. But they didn't necessarily disbelieve in God. And so freethinkers in history included Ibn al-Rawandi and Abu Bakr al-Razi. It's an ambiguous term when you say that they are a zindiq or that they are some sort of freethinker. Did they believe in God or not? That is unclear. But what is certain is that they didn't believe in religious authorities among themselves. And today in the Muslim world, there are free thinkers who believe in God, but because they have certain tensions with the ulama in their community, they are sometimes portrayed as non-believers, or they are sometimes accused of atheism when that's not the case. It's just that they have, you could say, beef, if that was the word that Alex mentioned before, with certain figures in their community. And then there is the skeptic, someone who withholds judgment until sufficient evidence is available. And so again, Sayyid Rizvi mentioned Bertrand Russell, who viewed himself as a skeptic. He said, look, I I am going to withhold judgment on this issue until sufficient evidence is provided to me that this thing exists, whether we're talking about God or something else related to the supernatural. A theist is someone who believes in the existence of a supernatural deity. Hopefully that's clear. That's a beginning point. An atheist, it's from the Greek a, theos, right? A means without, and theos meaning God, is someone who does not believe in God. Or you could say someone who simply lacks belief in a deity. So lacking belief in a deity doesn't necessarily mean that you are claiming that you can prove the non-existence of that deity. You can be someone who simply just didn't grow up with those beliefs, right? And so atheism can have a neutral connotation to it. An atheist can have, I could say, one of three attitudes towards religion. They can have a negative view of it, they can have a positive view of it, and they can have a neutral view of it. The negative one is the one that's previously mentioned, that they are an anti-theist, someone who opposes religion, who opposes theism because they believe it's harmful. And I think the term that people have used earlier is militant atheism to refer to that. But what about the one who has a positive view of religion? Religious atheists might include Buddhists, Unitarians, Jains, who keep their religious identities, or Jews, who keep their religious identities and philosophies without believing in God, in a God or in a deity. And there are those who have a more or less neutral view, and I would say perhaps they are a post-theist, one who believes questions about God don't matter anymore. And again, this is something that has come up again when Sheikh Vinay was providing his presentation. This person would say that we humans are preoccupied with debates about God's existence in the past, but this debate is no longer a meaningful one. Right? And so attachment to a particular religion isn't meaningful. It could have benefit for some, it can be harmful for others, but they don't put themselves as saying that religion is necessarily one or the other. And so we've defined the types of humans that may exist on this question of God, but when we talk about the concept of God, we should also define what we are talking about. And here I want to turn to the God hypothesis, so to speak. I'd argue that the term denoted a supernatural creator or a conscious, intelligent agent. The term also denoted a deity that was worthy of worship and whom humans should petition in prayer. And so when we talk about the God hypothesis, it's a hypothesis that posits that there exists a supernatural and superhuman agent who deliberately designed and created the universe and everything in it, including us. And so what does that mean? When we say supernatural, we're saying that beyond this physical world, beyond this universe that we occupy, there is an unseen world, right? Beyond matter and energy and the life that has been given to us as animals or as plants, beyond this natural world, which we can study through physics or chemistry and biology, there is the supernatural. There is the ghaib, the unseen world. If someone is a naturalist or a materialist, they would be opposed to this supernaturalist worldview. They would say there's only this physical world. And so when you believe in the God hypothesis, you posit that there are supernatural causes. There is an agent or agents that represents the answer to why something exists. And so the God hypothesis in the ancient and medieval world held that God was the creator and, as Sheikh Subhani mentioned, the designer of the universe and all life. God is the supernatural cause to why good things or good fortune can occur to people. God was also the supernatural cause for why natural disasters befell a city or a nation. God was the cause for miracles that saved a community from destruction. God was the source for when Jesus with his two hands is able to give vision to someone who is blind, and so on. In being a superhuman and intelligent agent, this denotes the idea that God is more powerful and knowledgeable when compared to humans, right? More powerful meaning a human cannot end God's existence, but the opposite is true. And it's for this reason that ancient societies recognize this hierarchy between themselves. And they recognize many hierarchies, right? That the free folk were higher than the enslaved, that men were higher than women. And so they recognize that kings were higher than laypersons or subjects. And so they recognize that the King of Kings in this God hypothesis was some power that was beyond, that was superior to humans. He was the wisest and most powerful agent in the universe. God was immortal and eternal, never weakened by age or fatigue. And so in being the wisest being, God is the source of scripture, right? Books with the answers that we need for guidance. And so it's for all of these reasons that the deity was viewed as definitely worthy of worship. Now, for believers in the God hypothesis, God created this universe and human life with a grand purpose in mind. And I think that's, again, a very important distinction between an atheist and a theist. That an atheist or someone who lacks belief in God will say, well, things will exist just 'cause, right? There is no purpose or ultimate meaning to the existence of the universe. It just exists. In the way that fire just burns and two hydrogen molecules and an oxygen molecule is water. It just is, right? And so for a believer, they'll say no, that there is a grand purpose in mind, that God does not create the universe out of futility, right? Someone would say that purpose could be to experience love, to worship God, to know God, to experience bliss in heaven, and so on. And so for a person of faith, there is a deliberateness in all creation, right? And this is of course spoken of in the Quran. And so it's with that introduction we turn to what is not part of the God hypothesis. The argument that atheists make is that when you have individuals who retreat from the God hypothesis and they provide alternative, less objectionable conceptions of God, as again Sheikh Vinay mentioned, individuals who create a religion that is just soothing for themselves, they stretch the meaning of words until they retain scarcely anything of their original sense. By calling God some vague abstraction which they've created for themselves, they pose as deists, as believers before the world, and they may even pride themselves as having attained a higher and purer idea of God, but their God is nothing but an insubstantial shadow and no longer the mighty personality of religious doctrines. The point here is that you've had deeply critical thinkers who identify as believers in God retreat from the God hypothesis in different ways. They've, for example, recognized that, well, the God of the Hebrew Bible and the Quran seems to resemble a tribal God where, you pray to that deity and they take their side against other tribes, thinking again of the Hebrew Bible and the Israelite God versus these other tribes that existed in the ancient Near East. And so people have tried to rethink how they can have a God that doesn't fit that model. And when they retreat from that God hypothesis, they understand that, for example, if God is completely transcendent and isn't involved in who wins the next soccer or football game or who wins the next war or so on, that when one engages in prayer, it's a symbolic activity where you are sharing your concerns with this deity without expecting intervention because this deity is completely transcendent. And so the argument that atheists and even traditional ulama have made is that when you retreat from that concept of God, you have lost its original meaning and that it no longer upholds the doctrines and beliefs that previous believers held in regards to God. And to sum up, there are three lessons I'd like us to draw from this talk. First, that there are anti-theists, those who are strongly opposed to the phenomenon of religion and the concept of God. And there are atheist practitioners of religion who view religion as a positive vehicle of spiritual practices that help with human well-being. There are classical doctrines about God in this God hypothesis that modern, progressive believers retreat from because they recognize that there are some tensions and problems, and they begin to portray that God as a non-interventionist God. And there are traditional practitioners of religion who would say, that is not God that you are worshiping when you do this. Lastly, I'd like to turn to the fact that there are atheist practitioners of religion and spirituality, and within the Islamic tradition, they have been viewed as individuals who've rejected Islam, and so most theologians have considered unbelievers who've refused conversion to Islam to be doomed. And they typically understood such individuals as doing this as a result of arrogance and pride. However, they also recognized that some of these unbelievers engaged in what theologians called nadhar, careful examination of Islamic doctrines. And according to one theologian, I've only found one in the early period, one Mu'tazili theologian, he said, if someone engages in careful examination of Islamic doctrine, they exerted great effort in their search for the truth, but came to the conclusion that Islamic doctrines were false, that it would not befit God's wisdom to punish the latter when they've committed no offense, no jurm. Their responsibility was to carefully consider the existence of God and their duties to such a creator, and they sincerely attempted to fulfill this duty. God would judge such individuals who exerted great effort in seeking the truth to be excused, ma'dhur. We know this because God states, God does not create hardship and adversity in his religion or such an impossible situation for his creation, and God doesn't create such adversity or impossible situations for one with sight, for one who has been paralyzed, or for one who's facing illness. Otherwise, it would be considered taklif ma la yutaq, the imposition of a duty on one who's unable to fulfill the duty. Or that person would fall under the category of people that scholars have termed insufficiently equipped to recognize the truth of Islam, mustad'af or mustad'afun. And so the Arabic is man balagha fi al-talab wal-nadhar wa istifragh al-majhud wa lam yanil al-maqsood. زعم الجاحظ, this Mu'tazili theologian, أنه معذور إذ لا يليق بحكمة الحكيم أن يعذبه مع بذل الجهد والطاقة من غير جرم وتقصير كيف وقد قال الله تعالى وما جعل عليكم في الدين من حرج وليس على الأعمى حرج ولا على الأعرج حرج ولا على المريض حرج. جزاكم الله خير. صدق الله العلي العظيم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you, Dr. Hussein, for your talk on very interesting anti-theism. It's a different category. I haven't thought about that. Thank you very much. Now we're going to shift to the Q&A. So I'll call up Alexander to take over again.
But Sheikhna, you can't go because you're on this Q&A. You're on the Q&A. Just when you thought you were safe. So as I said earlier, we're going to do a combined Q&A with Sheikh Vinay, Dr. Hussein, and Sheikh Subhani. Unfortunately, our dear colleague David Coolidge has to leave. Assalamu alaikum, David. We wish you safe travels. See you next year. Inshallah. Yeah. So if I could invite Professor Nabil Hussain, Sheikh Saeed Subhani, and Sheikh Vinay Ketia onto the stage. We can do a Q&A. So just to remind everyone of the format of Q&As, we have 2 microphones up here, and somewhere I have a tablet which will enable me to see the questions that are coming in. Yes? Oh, look at that. Wow, you see, this is how dua works. It's like you stretch out your hand and you receive what you asked for. Allahu Akbar. So I'll be receiving questions on Slido. So if you want to ask questions, you can go on slido.com/ICAIR, and that will you can send questions to us. So if you could please, also, by the way, while this Q&A is going on, because we are a bit pressed for time, if you want to get up and go and grab some tea or coffee, you can do that as well. You know, there's tea and coffee at the back of the room. Don't feel you have to wait for the end of the Q&A to do that. But if you have questions, please come up, line up behind the microphones, and ask your questions. We've got 3 distinguished speakers here for you to benefit from. And it would be a shame for them to come all this way and not to be grilled a little bit. We have to give them, if they really want thawab, if we really want to make sure they get their thawab, they have to go through imtihan. They have to go through a test. So this is the imtihan and the bala. So let's start on the sister side. Sister, Bismillah.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
I have a question. It was addressed for Sheikh Vinay and as well as Al-Hajj Saftar Jafar. You guys talked about the madrasa curriculum and the educational system, especially in Islamic schools for youths and children, and the advancements that you guys have taken on through WF. What I would like to know is, do you guys have in the near future the same vision to help volunteer teachers to advance themselves in the way that they're teaching in madrasa and teaching the youths of our times? Just because I am one of the early immigrant children who graduated from Eastern Madrasa. I went back into teaching, and I find the same pattern in all the children, where they just detest coming to madrasa. They don't like the teachers, they don't like what they're being taught, and it's always like a drag to get them out on Saturday morning or Sunday morning, yet for school, they're ready at 7:30 in the morning. And I'm finding that a lot has to do with the lack of teaching and education for volunteer teachers to come out and teach in the same type of social environment that the children are growing up in. We always follow the hadith of Imam Ali alayhi salam saying that he always says that raise your children according to the society that they're growing up in. But we're not teaching our children in the society that they're growing up in. And I think now it's kind of backfiring on us young parents. So to sum it up, my question is, what suggestions and possible avenues that you guys have in mind that parents and volunteer teachers can take place? And also, is there anything in your vision to help with teachers' trainings while you bring in new madrasa curriculum and content?
Well, my paper was not, I'm not representing any madrasa or anything like that. I run the Shia Research Institute, but I could just simply say that the root of issues is often that Sunday schools are voluntary-based, right? And when you have volunteers, they can only perform what they can up to the best of their abilities. And maybe relooking at that model may help developing something more structured, where people are able to answer certain kinds of questions, especially at a higher level. And we could probably avoid some of those issues. But again, I have no stake in it. In the sense that I'm not an administrator, so at least I used to be in Asadik. I have no affiliation with the Sunday school or their influence over that curriculum. But that's just my 2 cents in the structure of how teachers are appointed and the whole kind of emphasis on everyone's a volunteer. You get what you get when it's just volunteers. So anyways.
Does anyone else want to add anything? No? Okay. So if we could now have a question from the brother side. If I could just make a small request. We have about 25 minutes remaining in the Q&A/coffee break. That seems like a long time, but it can be depleted very quickly. We also have questions online. So if I could ask if I could ask questioners to keep their questions to under 1 minute, ideally under 30 seconds. So, try and keep the preamble as short as possible and get to the question. And I'm going to ask our experts on stage as well to try and limit their responses to 2 minutes or less so that we can get through all of the questions. And then if we find that there's a surplus of time, we can revisit some issues. Yeah, if we could. So, unfortunately, I will have to be a little bit brutal. So I'll tell you if you've gone over 30 seconds to start wrapping up your question. But if we could have the brother's side, please. Challenger number 1.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sheikh Mina, I was really touched by your discussion. Honestly, it touched me to the core. I've really been in this space when it comes to like friend circles and everything, surrounded by individuals who bring up questions that not only question your principles as being a person who was brought up in a religious family and like in the system where it was very practicing in a way, right? So obviously, not a scholar here, nor a very learned person. So this question came about while you were discussing the topic. So at an individual level, something of this magnitude, obviously understanding a person's perspective from a foundational, as you described, foundational departure, right? So something of this magnitude would require what I only understand almost a paradigm shift in a way, right? So the concept of changing perspectives and presenting realities in a step-by-step manner from an individual perspective while trying to understand that foundational departure. Like I said, I've admittedly not done my research, and I would hope there would be like a physical paper that could detail on this, but you definitely reference articles and stuff that I can check out. So my question would be, how would one understand the responsibility and how much of another person's ignorance or willingness to understand the message, or what do you call it? Yeah, how much undertaking the responsibility, how much of the person's ignorance and willingness is at play in this equation? If that makes sense. I think I stretched it out too much.
I kind of understand your question, to be honest, but I think I get it. Again, this has to do with childhood, right? I mean, people have childhood traumas and the way they've been brought up and taught religion. And honestly, like I said, I've seen everything under the sun almost in this community. Not just this, the GTA, right? We have 800,000 Muslims or so in this province. So it's a lot of Muslims, and being in the school, obviously meeting over 1,000 parents, there's all kinds of underlying trauma going on, right? And the way people were taught religion when they're young, the way it's prescriptive without explaining things, right? There's all kinds of reasons, right? And again, I think this belief in the existence of God, the understanding that, okay, I believe in God, but how does that shape my life, right? So drawing those connections between God and how that translates into someone's life. That's a point of departure. So that's where theology, the justice of God, Tawheed, obviously, that's core and central, right? And then understanding how that doesn't fit in many ways with what's being demanded from people in this kind of liberal framework in which they exist. And that's what Sayyid Ali Imran's talk, I think, fits directly with mine, right? Which is, I'm so glad that people like him are in education. We need to create new paradigms, new kinds of textbook, new ways of instruction. It's not simply about taking something from the East, translating it, and just kind of downloading it into a kid's brain. It just doesn't work that way, right? And you need to create new paradigms, right? But people have to be willing to learn. And that goes with anything in life. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us and guide all the believers, inshallah.
Thank you, Sheikhna. So now we will go to an online question here. And this is quite interesting because we actually had a roundtable discussion on this at Emmanuel College on Friday, which was really productive, on the subject of istighatha. So this is a doctrinal question. The question says that some people say that istighatha, so istighatha is doing tawassul through the infallibles, alayhim salam, is a form of shirk because an imam needs to be aware of all the supplicants and answer and answer their supplications. Therefore, and the imams, I'm assuming that it says they here, and therefore they are non-contingent. The imams are contingent beings, which makes the shirk. So basically, I think the kernel of the question is that is istighatha shirk because an imam would need to have knowledge of all the supplicants in order to answer them, and the imams are contingent beings, but to have such knowledge they would have to be non-contingent, i.e. God, which is shirk. So if I could turn that over to the panel, we have I think all of you are qualified to comment on this.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much for the question. Of course, I think we discussed this question when we were in the university. If whoever asks someone a question on condition that, or considering that person as an independent, yes, it's shirk. However, when we ask imam or infallible or pious people for any question, we consider him as a wasila, as a tool. And we do not ask him, please cure our children, or please do us for us. No, it's a tool. He's going to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As I said, for example, if I have a problem, sometimes I go directly towards, for example, my head teacher or my supervisor. Or sometimes I know the head teacher or my supervisor likes his son. Through his son, I'm going to approach him. So I do not consider his son as independent. So shirk, yes, it will be shirk if you consider the person you are questioning, if you are going to question him as independent, and he's going to cure your son, he's going to heal your son, he's going to, for example, fulfill your hajat. Yes, it's shirk. But we consider him as a wasila, as a tool. We ask him, since you are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, please ask on behalf of us. Ya wajihan end Allah. Since you are very waji, very close.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that answer, Sheikhna. So now if we could go back to the ladies' side. Bismillah. Sorry, there's a switch on top. It takes a moment to come on. Thank you.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. I don't know if Vinay can answer me this question again, but the secular schools have introduced sexual education. Have we, as a community, studied the sexual education that the secular are teaching, and how we can introduce it to our madrasas or to our people, or from the member too, to educate our youngsters as to how to handle these issues?
Question, sister, which is, and this is where I think, inshallah, Sayyid Ali Imran on the next panel will be, he's taken that mantle now. I've moved on from, not that I'm not involved anymore, but it's not my day-to-day work anymore. But it's something obviously I'm very passionate about, because I see all these children of the school as my own children. And yes, I think that having more professional development along the lines of what does a tarbiyah curriculum look like is vitally important. And what does that mean? And I think that there are other schools and other scholars and other institutions that are doing that already, and we don't need to recreate the wheel, or reinvent the wheel rather. And they exist, like out in California, and as Sayyid Ali Imran was saying, in Australia. So there are other institutions that are doing that, but I think the most important thing is just simply to be aware of the presuppositions that are inherently found in a secular textbook. Where does that come from? Where do those presuppositions come from? I think it just starts from a point of self-awareness. And one of the things that I used to do when I was at Asadiq is we used to have regular meetings with teachers to deconstruct their teaching. So I would look at their curriculum, I would look at what they're teaching, and ask them, what is your point of departure when teaching math? What is your point of departure when teaching science? How did you reach these conclusions, right? And sometimes the teachers themselves, because they've spent 10, 15, 20 years in the secular education system themselves, don't even realize. It's not that they have a bad intention. They're mu'min, Shia, inshallah. They're believers on the path of Ahlul Bayt, but they themselves don't, because they've just digested it, right? So I think having more solid teacher training is very important, and having institutions devoted to that by people that are actually qualified to do so, though. Again, it's not about translating Persian and Arabic into English and downloading it into their brains. This whole idea of I'm just going to import what I need from the East and just shove it down their throat and tell them to accept it is not going to work. It has to be in a vocabulary, a language, and an epistemology that they understand, right? It has to be. And we're just going to continue failing at this if we keep reinventing the same old ways of doing things. So I think that's a part of teacher training. And I think people like Sayyid Ali Imran, I think, are doing a good job in that, and we should support him, inshallah.
Yes, and just to remind everyone, Sayyid Ali Imran will be returning for the Q&A at the end of panel 3, so there'll be opportunities to discuss these educational issues further then, but thank you. Now we go to the brother side. Ready, player 2.
Assalamu alaikum. This question is for Sheikh Subhani about the teleological argument. I'm sorry, I'm too far. This question is for Sheikh Subhani, if you could honor me with an answer. So the teleological argument is quite a long one, like you explained in your history. It has a long history. But there have been responses to it by atheists or maybe skeptics. And the famous one that I know is by David Hume, who presented a series of questions, I guess. Like, for example, how can we analogize things in the natural world to human creations? Or if we take the watchmaker argument, we allow the possibilities of flaws within a watch, does that also apply to the universe? And we like to believe that Allah is perfect and His creations are perfect, right? But this analogy also allows for flaws, so it doesn't really work with our theology. So I'm wondering if you have any counters, and I know your presentation wasn't fully comprehensive, you didn't have enough time, unfortunately, but I was wondering if you can expand maybe a little.
If I understand your question well, you say, how can we reach to such conclusion that the order of the world prove that the creator of the world is wise? Okay? As I said, there are two perspectives. One is from the philosophical perspective, which I said, it should be a type similarity between cause and effect. So what does it mean? For instance, if you read a great book from Aristotle, from Avicenna, and you said this book is so scholarly. So due to type similarity between cause and effect, you say the author of this book should be intelligent, because it should be a relation, a harmony, consistency between cause and effect. If the effect is wise, its creator, its architect definitely should be wise. It is a type similar senkhiyya. So it shows that if effect is wise, I'm talking from the philosophical perspective, its creator should be wise. Okay? Of course. But regarding some Christian thinkers, they say they do not discuss from the philosophical perspective. They say when you see the watch is so accurate, is so precise, is so, for example, perfect, you say its architect is, it shows that the architect is very clever, is so wise. However, the question comes to our mind, is it okay for you? Do you need more answer? It's good. Finish? But there are other questions, inshallah. When the article will be published, I will discuss, inshallah.
Thank you, Sheikh Suhani, for that very insightful answer. Now, a question online. A question for Sheikh Nabil. You've been promoted, Sheikhana. Can you elaborate a bit more about religious atheism? Is it similar to Alain de Botton's Atheism 2.0, a famous TED talk, which is sort of like a best of both between religion and non-belief?
Thank you for the question. I haven't seen the TED Talk, so I wouldn't be able to comment on that. But there have been, in history, before what people would call secular humanists, there were religious humanists who believed that there were certain values that were important and they identified as Jewish, Christian, Muslim, or whatnot, and that the most important part of their faith was these values related to charity and helping society and about this world. After religious humanists, there were secular humanists who said, all right, we're going to focus on those values, but we're no longer going to identify with these religions. I'd argue that religious atheists are individuals who say we may not uphold the theological doctrines associated with our religion, but we are engaged in the tradition in a way where we care about those values, whether it's charity, and we recognize that that is something that has been taught to us by, let's say, the Prophet Muhammad, or from the Bible, or so on, whatever religious tradition that they're coming from. And so for them, the theological doctrines may not be something that they uphold, but they see a value in being part of the community. They see a value in, this is something that probably many of you have heard within Judaism has occurred, where there are people who don't uphold the doctrines, atheist Jews. They don't uphold the doctrine of monotheism. They don't believe in, let's say, following the commandments of the Torah, but they have, I think it would be critical according to the 40 hadith that there's a ta'assub there, but like that they have a connection to their community and saying there's a value in being part of this community. And so religious atheists are people who don't believe in a deity, but they practice certain spiritual practices in seeking serenity, peace, community. And so outside of the Abrahamic faiths, there are people related to Eastern religions who've done this.
If I could actually just ask a follow-up on behalf of the, because I think with Atheism 2.0, what they're talking about is sort of this idea that you have atheistic, so it's not that so much like they're atheistic Jews, so they remain sort of as part of a Jewish community, but I might be misremembering the TED Talk. I think it's the idea that it's sort of atheism plus spirituality, but it's kind of like a humanistic religion.
Oh, yes. So Sam Harris has gone through that path. Sam Harris is a well-known atheist, one of the four horsemen that Sayyid Rizvi mentioned. But he cares very much about spirituality. And so we have to define spirituality now. What is spirituality? Usually when we think of spirituality, we think of a horizontal relationship where humans are trying to engage in a mi'raj, get close to God, proximity to God. And the way that I've understood it is that atheism, or atheists who care about spirituality, it's more about the horizontal. They care about everyone on this earth. So it's like having a connection with the earth, having a connection with other humans, and finding serenity in that rather than trying to seek the mi'raj is what they're doing. So with Sam Harris, he engages in meditation. He'll wake up early in the morning and do his meditation. He has his own litany, just as people have their own tasbih or so on. Their breathing techniques, going into nature. These are things that we would do as Muslims and say, I can find something beautiful in watching the sunrise, the sunset, going on hikes or so on. And so atheists would say, rather than saying that I don't have to go into the critiques of atheists, but what they would say that a word that we can use to describe the awe and the peace and the bliss that we feel in prayer or in these other activities is a connection that is called numinous, which was coined I forget. Thank you, by Rudolf Otto, a very famous scholar of religion. And the numinous is that when the human feels, maybe people would say bast, that they have an expansion of the heart, expansion of the soul, and they would argue that the word or this experience is something that transcends religion. Any human can feel it, and so there are atheists who are aware of that, and they say that that's important in their life.
Very interesting. Thank you for explaining that. Now, if we could go to the sister side again. Sister, go ahead. You may need to turn the microphone on. Half the fun of the Q&A is us all struggling with the AV system.
Thank you so much. Okay.
I don't know. Guys in the AV room, do we have injury time for this? Just for our fiddling with the mic? Injury time? Yeah, that's how soccer works. I'm quite impressed. Thank you. Sister, go ahead.
Yeah, so just letting on from what you just mentioned, but also a little bit of a divergence. You're going to see, I think what I've seen is from the ladies' side, a lot of stuff talking about children. So I'm going to lead on from that. And what I really appreciate is that university lecturers and so much research, but tailoring what you say to the temperaments of children now, specifically in terms of the argument of God by design. And, I'm going to read out the question. Maybe that's just going to help with saving time. So in light of design argument for the existence of God, how can we reconcile the traditional Islamic views on homosexuality with the increasing normalization of LGBTQ identities in society? And how can this argument be used to engage constructively with LGBTQ individuals, and also specifically about our younger generation who are seeing these? They see that, I'm taught in madrasa, this is one of the biggest sins, and then society is saying this is, you just need to be a good human. I remember when I was in the UK, I had a friend who, she believed that Satanism has 7 rules, and one of them, the major ones, is being good. And I was like, what? So now you as scholars, with all your abundance of experience, can you tailor a specific example of how you can explain LGBTQ in terms of what school is teaching to a 5-year-old? In terms of the design argument for God. So God has designed naturally, you know what I'm saying, in terms of it's not allowed, but at the same time, God loves everyone, but he doesn't love LGBTQ. So just a little bit of thoughts and examples of what you could say to a 5-year-old.
Well, since I did mention it, but then maybe Sheikh can add to it. I think that this concept of the argument from design and, in discussing about the issue of LGBTQ and connecting the two, I don't want to go into all those details, but I think one of the important things is if we believe in this concept of human beings having an essence, and ultimately that essence comes from a divine creator. But as Dr. Nabil Hussein was just kind of pointing out, well, that's not really enough, right? Because people like Sam Harris wakes up and maybe he believes in that and has some kind of spiritual practices. Revelation and prophethood has to be a part of the equation. Without that, then it's all good. Really, it's like, I'm just a good person, right? So for us, wahi and nabuwa is critical. For example, why in Surah Yasin does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala go on and on in talking about the Prophet and then basically saying to them that if you don't accept him, we're putting chains around their necks. So it's not enough for them to be good people. They didn't accept the Prophet Muhammad's message. So then God says, right, وَجَعَلْنَا, right? And we put chains around their necks. Why? Because there is something in not accepting the prophecy that's the problem. So I think that ultimately, I'm not so much convinced in this whole that we can kind of approach this issue. Unless you take the Christian route of natural law, and you read someone like Robert George's The Clash of Orthodoxies, who I mentioned, that might be a way, but this is a long discussion. But I think ultimately we need to be convinced of the necessity of revelation and prophethood. If we are convinced that God has created us, he has put us on this earth, and we have a purpose, we discover that purpose through revelation and prophecy. That's the pin. As soon as you pull that out, it's anyone's game. So I think that's very important. If those two things are not emphasized, then just believing in God is really just kind of therapy. But Sheikh can maybe add to that.
I think it's better I reword your question. If we believe in the order in the world, How can we justify the chaos in sometimes we see a chaos in the world? For example, in Dubai, recently we saw a chaos. A modern city of Dubai was closed. So if we say Allah, there is a precise order in this world, how can we justify the earthquake? How can we justify the hurricanes? How can we justify for example, the rain and flood in Dubai? So for answer this question, just very briefly, first of all, our knowledge is limited. وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. We cannot justify everything in the world. Yes, we can justify 70%, 80%, everything. Allah created everything is all purpose, and Allah is Hakim. Allah never does anything without any reason or philosophy. So first of all, مَا أُوتِيتُم إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. And second one, sometime in second answer, sometime, but this answer is not applicable everywhere. Sometimes we feel something is bad, but it's not bad. أَسَوْ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. So sometimes we say this earthquake or this hurricane or this so and so is bad, but we don't know the philosophy. It might is good. The second answer is that sometimes all this disaster, we made it, not God. For example, nowadays they say if you produce a lot of dioxide carbon, so it will cause a problem. All the ice is going to be melt and the level of the sea goes up and it will be so flood. So some disaster is made by the human being. Quran says, ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس. And the third answer is that it is exam. بَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ. Sometimes this disaster is for exam. Allah is going to test us. How come? By hunger, fear, taking the soul. Why? Allah wants to know who is the best. Allah knows who is the best. Allah wants to prove us that whether you are best or not best. So another answer is to awakening us. Sometime there is a great hadith, النَّاسُ نِيَامٌ إِذَا مَاتُوا انْتَبَهُوا. The people are sleeping. One earthquake awaken him. May Allah elevate the soul of Allāmi Tabatabai Rizwanullah Ta'ala. He says sometime in the midnight, one headache awake you. Why? From the depth of heart you say, Ya Allah. So sometimes we are sleeping, النَّاسُ نِيَامٌ. The people are sleeping. إِذَا مَاتُوا انْتَبَهُوا. When the Israel come, they get up. Then they say, oh, where am I? فَكَشَفْنَا عَنْكَ قِطَاعَكَ فَبَصَرَكَ الْيَوْمَ حَدِيدٌ. The people, when they come, when the Israel come, they say, where we are? They say, you are the same place. But at that time, you were blind. So Allah wants to awaken us. And the last answer, the last justification, Allah wants to prove, understand the value of ni'mat. So health is a ni'mat. Security is a ni'mat. So and so ni'mat, Allah wants to show the value of His blessing.
Thank you very much, Sheikh Subhani. I'm afraid, unfortunately, we've run out of time. There's a lot of questions online that I haven't got through. I'm really sorry you've been waiting patiently, unfortunately. But what I would suggest is that perhaps if you have questions, the shuyukh aren't going anywhere. They're stuck here until the end. Well, most of them are stuck here till the end of the day. No, because we have to get ready for the next panel. So perhaps in the 5 minutes while we're setting up for the next panel, you can ask your questions directly. That's okay. And I apologize again for the time constraints. Thank you. And can I just thank our presenters who've come up to answer questions, Sheikh Saeed Subhani, Sheikh Vinay Ketia, and Dr. Nabil Hussain. Thank you for coming up here. It's not easy because you never know what you're going to be asked. But I think we can all agree that they did a fantastic job. So let's show our appreciation with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And now, just as we get ready for the next panel, we have a couple of our esteemed speakers who have to depart. So if I could ask Cyrus Zargar, Professor Cyrus Zargar, and Sayyid Suleiman Hassan to come up so that we can express our appreciation for them. Please welcome them up with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And also, if I could ask the President of WF, Hajj Safta Jafar, to come up as well to present the awards.